Hello, everybody. It's a great Monday, and I hope that you are enjoying this day. I'm Stephannie Solomon. If you're new to this broadcast, this is the Winning Ways broadcast, and I'm excited about tonight because I'm going to be sharing in a topic that is pretty tender, pretty touchy, and my guest is more of an expert in this field than surely I am, but I have had lots of conversations with individuals who definitely are dealing with this matter. But before I get into it, I just want to say welcome to the broadcast. Thank you for tuning in. If this is your first time, I'm glad that you jumped on this side. Please subscribe, hit the like, get engaged. I am trying to build this platform. If you're new again, I am an author, I'm a podcaster, been podcasting since 2011. I get confused, 2010, 2011, around there. And I'm an author of several books, and basically my podcast center around the topics in my books, and also let's see, here we go, and also center around some of the common conversations, well, I wouldn't say conversations, but topics with my life coaching business, Evolve for Life, and my niches are in forgiveness and family dynamics. All right, so I'm just looking here. My guest, hopefully she will jump in pretty soon. All righty. And so that's what I do. And I've been doing it for a minute. And if you would like to be a part of Evolve for Life, which is my life coaching service, look at my website. There's a link attached here, www.stephaniebooks.com. And I would love to consult with you and see if we are a good fit. All right. I'll talk more about that a little later, but I want to get right into things. And my guest is here. Hi, Brenda. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Are you enjoying summer?
I am. I definitely am. It beats the other weather we could have.
Yeah, it's coming to an end. Well, I was just telling my guests that we're going to be talking about a tender topic tonight, and it's pretty vast. And I know that we can't cover it all tonight, but I really want to hone in on this this word that's being thrown around a lot, especially on the relationship platforms. There are a lot of relationship platforms out there, and I'm just hearing and seeing on social media, narcissist. You know, yes. But you're the expert with that term, because it really is a clinical term, and a lot of people just use it so freely and don't understand that they're attaching labels and identities to people that may not necessarily describe them. But we want to hopefully break that barrier tonight. But what I really want to do, I really want to zoom in as we clarify what a narcissist is. I want to hone in on the family dynamics side, because I am a family dynamics coach, and I really cater to individuals who are having challenges and struggles in those areas. And the word narcissist pops up frequently in that arena as well. And so what I first want to do is introduce the world to Brenda. And this is Brenda's second time, and I really appreciate your time, Brenda. I really do. And I appreciate you saying yes.
Oh,
and saying and saying yes again. And Brenda is an author. Brenda is a podcaster. Brenda is a counselor, therapist. She's doing great service for humanity. And before we get deeper into two things, I want people to know what your services are. You actually have a you are a narcissist abuse recovery coach. That's
indeed.
long but very specific.
It is.
And I like the fact that you not only have one-on-one services, but you also have group services as well. And there are two books, folks, that you need to pay close attention to. She has a workbook out. It's called the Narcissism Recovery Workbook.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds awesome. And hopefully you can tell us a little more about that a little later. And recovering from narcissistic mothers. And this is part of the touchy conversation
It
because
is.
in our culture, we well, just about every culture, basically every culture, we laud our mothers, and we should, because they were chosen to be the bodies to bring us into this world. However, all mothers are not what Hallmark cards credit them to be.
Yep.
And I want to be careful how I frame this, because I don't want to sound as though I'm abusing mothers, because I am a mother myself.
Yes, me too.
And I am imperfect. And when my daughter puts it out there, the things that I have to, and I have to either choose how I'm going to respond. And my thing is, I am a forever learner. And so I want to forever learn to be a better version of me. And that means even being a better mother. So that said, again, this is a touchy topic because there are a lot of people who are suffering because they are in a quagmire. They have hardly anyone to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
But it comes out because we have to explode at some point, and it comes out. And as a not only as a life coach, but before I was a life coach, this was a common topic. It's a common conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, male and female, have parents, both parents, mothers and fathers, who could have the attributes, I think, of what narcissists are. But you're going to explain to us what those attributes really are, because sometimes we look at people who are self-centered, manipulative as narcissists. And so what I want to clear up tonight is, can a person be a serial manipulator, and not be a narcissist? Or does a narcissist have that trait? But you can a person can be a manipulator but not be a narcissist.
Yes. So, yes. And it's so funny that you're asking this question, because I just had a conversation with someone today who was telling me about their 3-year-old son who had figured out how to use a little bit of mom guilt. Right. And just, mom and dad are working all the time. And usually when they're working, they buy me a toy. So a 3-year-old clearly is not a narcissist, but I think we can say that that's a little bit of manipulative behavior. Right. And this is just kind of how I think we learn to negotiate the world. Right. If I do this, this happens. And that all of that can be called manipulation. It's when it starts to get really unhealthy and very abusive. I can't think of a better word, but when it becomes abusive and it's all about the manipulator getting their needs met at the expense of everybody else, then I think we're really treading into narcissistic territory. But as you said, narcissistic personality disorder is a diagnosable personality disorder. It's a big deal, and I'm so sorry. There are conditions. There are certain behaviors that need to be identified before somebody gets that diagnosis. The other thing is that I firmly believe, and I think most people that work with this population with narcissistic abuse victims, we see narcissism running on a spectrum. So you can have somebody who's selfish and maybe selfish and manipulative, might have a few narcissistic traits, but might be very low on the spectrum. And then you go all the way up to a malignant narcissist who is got all of the traits, everything that's in the diagnostic and statistical manual that those of us who are in the mental health field use to diagnose people. They may have all of the traits and really be on a very unhealthy, very high end of the spectrum. So manipulation is something that we all do at some time or another. It's, I think, our intent and the harm that it does other people where it really crosses a line.
Wow. So, can you raise a narcissist? When you mentioned that about the little boy, so is narcissism something that's inherited, or if it's not something that's inherited, is it possible that how we raise our child or the environment that a child is in can increase the likelihood of the personality becoming a narcissist? I mean, does it work that way too?
It does. It almost solely works that way. So this 3-year-old that I'm talking about is not going to become a narcissist. Just for the record, I mean, he's just doing 3-year-old things, and it's a real person. So I don't want her to worry, the mother to worry, just in case. But for narcissists, I mean, typically there isn't a lot of research. We are starting to see a little bit more research, but there just isn't a lot. And most of the research that's being done is being done in Australia and New Zealand. So it's even very limited to a certain location. However, I do believe the road or the path to narcissism, as one of my grad school professors put it, is a 2-path way to get there. One is the overindulgence, the praising of the child to a degree that's really unhealthy, having the child think that they're better than everyone else and encouraging that kind of thought process, really spoiling the child. That can lead to narcissism, but that is not nearly as common as abuse and neglect, unfortunately. That is a big pathway to narcissism. So what children learn is when the neglect is probably out of abuse and neglect is probably the bigger key factor, but only by a minuscule amount. But when a child is sort of left to their own defenses to figure out whether they've done something right or wrong, when they're always trying to make that narcissistic parent happy and fly under the radar of the anger, they figure out how to use manipulation in their favor. And this is something that they figure out at a very young age, and then it develops into using that in all of their relationships. So at some point, they're getting into friendships and romantic relationships, and they've learned this skill that by the time they're, in their early 20s, maybe, they're masters, they're pros at it. And this then defines all of their relationships for them. It's what can that person do for me? How can I manipulate them to get my needs met?
Wow. You said something interesting about left to their own devices, I think you said, or defenses. And that's neglect.
It is.
So when as soon as you said that, my mind just went to different individuals that I've encountered along the way. And none of them met the criteria of being spoiled, like you mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
They were all individuals who had, I would even say, severe hardship, coming up. There were, in all of their cases, there was either one parent or both parents in the home, but the environments that they were in were extremely tough when I think about their upbringing. And wow. So I'm just thinking, it seems more likely that environment and how someone is fostered, or maybe the lack of proper fostering for parenting. Not that no one's parenting is perfect, but the proper and appropriate parenting skills are lacking.
Yes.
And but it's also interesting when I think about these individuals. Because sometimes I think I should have just done case studies. Think about you can have, because all of these individuals are not only children, they
Correct.
have siblings, and their siblings do not display that behavior that appears to be narcissistic.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes me wonder, can a person have the propensity? I mean, could it be something in a personality of a person that's prone to gravitate to a certain way of manipulating or figuring out how the world works, and how people work,
Yeah. Well, so as I mentioned, the lack of research on this is really a shame. But I have read some research. When I was writing my second book, I came across a couple of research articles that talked about the genetic factor, and there just isn't enough known about it right now. What we know is environment plays a huge role. I think what we know in life when it comes to people, there's always a mix between genetics and nature and nurture, basically. And what you brought up, I'd like to expand on that a little bit more if I can, about the families and the children. So if a narcissistic family, they all typically look the same. So you may have a single parent or a two-parent family. If it's a two-parent family, typically one is a narcissist. Sometimes both are narcissists, but one typically tends to be a little more narcissistic, if I can say that. And the other parent tends to be rather codependent, and enables the narcissist because they also don't want to be in the firing range, basically.
Wow.
So they enable, they try to keep the narcissist happy. And this is another way that children get neglected, because oftentimes, and I'm just going to use stereotypical roles for examples here, but let's say the father is the narcissist. The mother is more of the caretaker, but she's so busy trying to keep him happy and not blowing up or not being physically violent that she's in survival mode all the time. Wow. So the kids basically get the scraps of what's left over. All the while, they are also trying to navigate their relationship with the narcissistic parent while trying to receive the love from the enabling parent. So it's really a terrible, terrible situation for the children. And then the children also typically have assigned roles, and these roles will maneuver over time, and sometimes one child will be more in favor than the other, but we typically have a golden child, a forgotten child, and a scapegoat. And I can expand on those if you like, but
please do.
Please do. So the golden child is often the one that meets all of the, all is a big word, meets most of the expectations of the narcissistic parent. They probably get good grades at school, they're popular, they're good at sports, things like that. Something that the parent can see and brag about. It's not typically really pride in the child, it's more the child makes me look good because they got straight A's and got accepted on a free ride to college or something like that. The forgotten child, actually, let me go to the scapegoat first. It'll make the forgotten child make more sense. But the scapegoat is the opposite of the golden child. They are typically the ones that are blamed for everything. Like, if only they wouldn't behave this way, our whole family would be so much better. Or all of the bad things that happen get blamed on the scapegoat. And this might be where you're seeing differences in families that you're familiar with. And then the forgotten child doesn't fall into either one of those categories. They typically learn how to just kind of fly under the radar. They just don't get attention. They don't garner attention. Try to not get in the firing range of the narcissist either. They also don't want to kind of double up with mom to enable, if it's mother who's the enabler. They just kind of get lost in the mix. So, and these roles can change. They shift around depending on who's in favor and who's out of favor. The forgotten child tends to stay in that role pretty pretty consistently, I would say. But even that can change. But this is a very typical dynamic in a narcissistic family, what I've just explained.
Wow, that is, whew, that is something. It's heavy. It's
It's
very heavy, and it really is weighty for the child, the
oh
impact. And I want to talk more about the impact too on children. But you did mention something and made me think when you talked about each child, the scapegoat, the neglected, and I guess the model child. And you wonder sometimes what mental gymnastics do children have to adjust and jump through? I'm even thinking about adapting. I am big on adapting. And
mhm,
I think that human beings adapt more than what we care to even think we do.
I agree.
And I think we get older and we make it complicated. But I often, when I think about my own self, when I discovered this myself, I'm like, oh my God, I adapted a lot. This happened and that happened, but I never thought of it as that.
Yeah.
But I think if people really sit down and analyze themselves from childhood on up, they'll see how they adapted to middle school, how they adapted to their first job, any job, the culture of the job,
Mhm.
the classroom, you adapt. And I'm thinking when you have a parent or two, oh God forbid you have two parents who are narcissists, but like you said something interesting. Usually a narcissist has to have someone who's an enabler. So the spouse is usually someone who is a codependent or enabler,
Yeah.
not another narcissist. But the children, whether they are, the good seed, bad seed, whatever they want to call them, to me, I'm thinking they all are learning to have these mental gymnastics over time. And that has got to impact them as an adult in a very harsh way. Because, I think about how the child who gets the good grades, I remember teaching, it was called Gifted and Talented at the time,
Mhm.
children. And I'm telling you, these kids were smart, but they were stressed.
Oh.
They couldn't take anything. An A minus was, oh no, because they were already imagining what life would be like, what they would hear. And I'm like,
Mhm.
girl, this is stressful for someone in sixth grade,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know. But that's the mental gymnastics, of pleasing these parents. So the child who's getting all the A's and the golden kid makes you wonder, what has this child figured out how to adapt, you
Yeah.
know, for so that they can stay out of the fire,
Oh, yeah.
you know? And the neglected child really, it, even though he or she may want attention, sees what the siblings are going through. You got to work real hard for that A.
Yes.
And boy, you get beat down a lot. So maybe it's best to stay out of the line of fire over here and not get any
Mhm.
love and affection, because no love and affection is coming to either one of them either.
Nope.
And the child has already figured out it's best to lay low. And these individuals, I think, grow up to become adults who don't try as hard. They're not high achievers, they're kind of mediocre. They don't see themselves as soaring because they've learned at such a young age to just, like you said, not fly, to be off the grid, to fly low,
Yes.
and be off the radar. And it's cool because you don't get flat. But at the same token, when they become an adult, I think they would have a problem adjusting and acquiring much in life, because now they have to break that pattern because
That's
of dynamics in that first community that they had. I think the impact, even though you say they're doing so much research on narcissism still, the fact that we have so many people as adults talking about this word and having it come up in relationships, and we know that those are patterns all over the place, that everything starts at home.
yes. Yeah.
Everything starts at home, and no family is perfect. But there are families who are trying to do their best to be unified, to be loving, affectionate, all these other things, and to do the work. But it is obvious that there are a lot of families that are fractured. It's a touchy thing to talk about because we have Mother's Day, Father's Day, we have holidays, and there are people who don't like being around their biological families.
Mm-hmm.
And many people have what I call toxic loyalty. You know,
Yes.
yeah, they're loyal because people say what you're supposed to be with your family. But in many cases, family is the worst place. As I tell some people, it is not always a place that anchors you. It should be where you get your strength and your source of strength rather and support and solace. But for many people, it's a place of struggle and stress. And that is a reality. I find that it's a hard topic to talk about just out in the open anywhere because you never know where that's going to land. And you have so many people who cannot relate to that. I'm not saying they can't relate to family struggles, but they can't relate to that type of struggle.
Yeah.
Where me and mom or me and dad, I'm in his or her presence, but I'm not devoted to him or her, because of the way that we were raised. I think that impact is lasting. And if we're not careful, it becomes a generational cycle that has to be broken. And the people who are suffering from it have to admit that it is what it is and that it stops with them.
Yes.
And those are the people who I'm working with, the people who are finding it, who are at a place in their older age to say, I have grandchildren now, and I see life so differently. I think it's hard too for a lot of people who are now caregivers, and they're caregivers of these narcissistic parents. So they're taking care of someone who's unappreciative, still very manipulative, underhanded, self-centered, unloving. It's extremely hard. Let's talk about the impact of living in a house. Well, wait a minute. Not just the parents, but we could have narcissistic siblings.
Yes.
So I don't want to pin this all on parents. And we could have a narcissist, because that's what we talked about earlier about what was it? Nurture versus nature. Yes. The environment can create a personality of, let's say you have a 15-year-old now who is exhibiting narcissistic behaviors. So we have a child now in a home, and the parents are looking like, who and what is this? So we have a narcissistic child. Let's talk about the impact of what that does to family dynamics when there is a narcissist within. I'm talking about the immediate family right now, not the grandparents and uncles and aunties, excuse me, but in the immediate household where there's either a parent, a sibling, or the offspring. What does that do to usually the mental state of the family members? What's going on other than, I would think, mental gymnastics of some sort,
That's a really good way to put it. And I think it's nonstop mental gymnastics, because I think everyone in the family, even the narcissist, their goal is to get as much, we call it supply. And that's basically attention, somebody to admire them, to kind of jump at their every request, that kind of thing.
Wow.
But their goal is to get narcissistic supply. And no matter where they are in the family dynamic, that is their goal. So that is going to bleed out into every other relationship they have within that family structure. And then you've got like all of the other members that we've talked about trying to figure out where they fit in. And if it's a narcissistic sibling, I hear this a lot because of social media. And there's a lot of talk of whether social media has created more narcissists. I
Mm,
don't think it has. I think
okay,
it has created a platform for narcissists that we've never seen before.
gotcha.
That's not to say that it's not possible that it's creating them too, because you see all these young people on, TikTok and all of these social media platforms. And I said TikTok on purpose. I don't. I'm old. I don't know how it works, but I know there's a lot of talk about narcissism and other personality disorders on TikTok that are really being permeated through younger culture, and it's a whole other ball game, and it's probably way too much to get into now. But we still have yet to see what that is going to create as this generation gets older. 12-year-olds getting on there and feigning, literally wanting to be diagnosed with narcissistic personality and another personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, for I don't know why. um, Attention, I guess, but I think we've got a lot to see in the future. But sorry, going back to your question, I mean, if it's a child that's acting out that way, and especially if they've figured out all of these manipulative behaviors and the ways that narcissists behave, the whole family is going to be walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
They're going to be trying to not set off the bomb of emotion. A narcissistic wound is when a narcissist has a very fragile ego, if any ego at all. All of what they see, how they see themselves, comes from what's reflected back at them. So if somebody challenges that or sees through that, we call that a narcissistic wound. And those wounds typically lead to rage from the narcissist. And that is often what everybody in the family is trying to avoid, is that rage. Because it can be really nasty, and they project what they don't like about themselves onto whomever they're raging toward. And it can feel obviously it can be very hurtful, and it can feel really bad. So there's a lot of advantage for everybody to kind of play these roles and walk on eggshells, excuse me, to avoid that narcissistic rage.
Mm-hmm. Wow. You said something that made me think. I said, whenever I post something on social media, which I have to do for my brand, but sometimes I feel like, is this a bit narcissist? Because I'm looking at all these posts and
So can I speak to that a little bit? So I will tell you, I can't think of a person that has come to me for help with narcissistic abuse that has not worried that they've done narcissistic things or are narcissists themselves. And in that action of just worrying about it is right there tells me they're most likely not a narcissist.
gotcha.
Because narcissists won't think twice about that.
Oh, that was good to hear.
Yeah, don't worry about that.
Because sometimes I look at what I'm doing and I'm like, I hope this doesn't look vain. Or I hope this doesn't, and I'm looking at all of my photos. I'm like, oh, that's a lot of me. 3, 6, 9, 12, all me. Okay. But and I wonder how that looks, and I'm like, oh wow, I have to really self-correct, But
Yeah.
and I see the one of our viewers here says this is great information. I'm glad that this is helpful. Oh my God, there's so much I want to talk about. I want to talk about the enablers. People who are very much aware, and I hear this often, like, well, you know how she is, or you
Yes.
know how he is, what does that do? I mean, I don't. It's sad because I've been in that space, and I know it when I see it, and when I have people talk to me, I feel their pain.
Oh, yeah.
I really do. I feel their pain because they feel as though they have no one in the family to go to, because everyone in the family knows that this particular person is just exhausting, dramatic, self-centered. They know all of this, but
Mhm.
it's like, everybody just be still and be quiet and accept it and let her be, or let him be.
Mhm.
How insane is that?
Isn't
because
it?
this perpetuate insanity. Let's
Mhm.
talk more about that. I'm getting a little upset here. Let's calm down. I'm not upset. It's just I'm passionate about this because when people come to me with this, I just feel their exhaustion and they know they have like nowhere to go.
Nowhere to go.
Society doesn't is not at a place right now to
Mhm.
amplify that. And so I think a lot of narcissistic children and parents can hide right now. They hide out behind a lot of things, and abuse goes on. And I want to talk about that because you are a narc abuse recovery coach. And
Yes.
so I want people to know that there's hope. So I'm going to take a really quick break, folks, and we're going to be right back right after this break.
Get Aging with Grace by Christian author, speaker, and podcast host Stephannie Solomon today on all digital and brick and mortar retail stores. For signed copies, purchase your books at www.stephaniebooks.com. That's www.stephaniebooks.com. Connect with this creative author on Instagram, Twitter, Google, and Facebook using her handle at Stephannie Books. That's at STEPHANNIE Books. Here's Stephannie Solomon on The Winning Ways Show, Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, a weekly podcast on blogtalkradio.com. Aging with Grace and other publications by Stephannie Solomon are available at Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, Books A Million, and other booksellers. For further information and speaking inquiries, log on to www.stephaniebooks.com. That's www.stephaniebooks.com.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Winning Ways with yours truly. And tonight we're talking about a real tender topic. We're dealing with narcissists within the immediate family. We're talking about narcissists in our family. A very real conversation to be had. And my special guest is Miss Brenda Stephens, who is a narc abuse recovery coach, as well as a therapist, author, podcaster on the subject of narcissism, narcissistic abuse. Before the break, Brenda, we were talking about enablers and people who find excuses for the narcissist. Why are they a problem?
Oh boy, that's a big question. I have really, well, I just don't even know where to begin. So let me say this. One of the hardest things for people who have been in relationships, with no matter what the relationship is with a narcissist, have issues with feeling valid. They question themselves constantly. Is this really a bad thing? Did the person really mean to harm me? Did they mean to hurt me? And then they tend to blame themselves. So if they have one parent that's a narcissist and another that's an enabler, that enabling parent is also invalidating the child or the other folks in the family, but typically the children, by saying, like you said earlier, oh, that's just the way he is. Oh, you know how dad gets, or, things like that, which further invalidates the way that the child's feeling. So the enabler, I honestly don't think the enabler is malicious in their intent. I think they are so exhausted and just so worn out by the relationship and by trying to keep the peace in the family that there's just nothing left. They really are in survival mode. But it's so incredibly damaging because the kids then have nobody to turn to. And as you mentioned earlier too, nobody talks about this kind of abuse, and it's insidious. And the other thing, if I can say this, when the narcissist is given all of this latitude to do what they do, right? Somebody saying, "Oh, you know how they are," it just makes it seem more normal.
Yes,
and it's terrible, and the kids doubt their own reality. And then when they talk about it, it's like, what are you talking about? Your dad's not that bad, or your mom's not that bad.
Yes.
And other people in the community, or their church, or extended family, nobody knows what's really going on, because the narcissist puts on a really mask, and the enabler reinforces that.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know that saying, "What goes on in this house stays in this house." You know, that
Yes.
has, oh, that has, it has really hurt a lot of young people.
Mm-hmm.
Has, we are at a place now in society, at least here in this part of the globe, where we say, "See something, say something." At least we say that, but but that should be for all things that are inappropriate or
Mm-hmm.
harmful. Not just terrorists. But we can have terrorists or bullies in our own home. We can have people who are doing abusive things that are not always sexual or physical.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people need to understand that mental abuse is real. Psychological abuse and emotional abuse is very, very real. One of the things that I've discovered is that children of a narcissistic parent tend to create a plan of survival. And that plan may change over time, but it's a lot of stress that comes with that. Thank you. And by the way, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for your comments and your likes. Thank you. Don't forget to subscribe. And I think that has got to create wear and tear, you know, on the heart, on the mind, the belief system
Yes.
of young people, because what do they grow up believing? You can't really trust people that much
Mhm.
if you feel as though no one will listen to me, no one would believe me. And like you said, that piece about when people see that narcissistic, especially if it's a parent, or it could be the sibling as well, they are different with people who don't live with them.
Definitely.
And it's always interesting to hear, oh, they're so this and they're so that. You're speaking from encountering this person for a few minutes out of how many days out of the year?
Exactly.
And you don't live with them, and you're drawing this conclusion. And so when children, especially when they're very young, hear this, they already develop a plan that I cannot say anything to Miss So and so. I can't say anything to Deacon so and so, Pastor so and so.
Mhm.
I can't say anything to Mr. So and so. I can't, because
Right.
all these people just love him and all these people just love her.
Yeah.
And what would I look like? I will look like the ungrateful child
Mhm.
or something wrong with me.
Yes.
And it's only until these individuals get into groups like what you have formed, I think is excellent, the groups that you formed. These spaces, safe spaces for them, not just to vent and talk about the heart and share horror stories,
Mhm.
because they can be horrible. I mean, I've seen people go, and they just don't have the capacity to handle what is being said. And that's what I tell people too. Be real careful, excuse me, how you dispense that information and where you do it. I don't care how nice, how qualified that teacher is, that educator is, that
Mhm.
pastor is, that church member that can really be really knowledgeable, nice people. But when it comes to certain topics, some people do not have the tolerance. And it doesn't mean it's not a bad thing, really, because I know that there are certain topics I have a low tolerance for.
Yes.
Even certain things. I saw something on someone's page right before this podcast, and I had to really work my head around. As I was seeing someone get beat up. I'm not doing well with that. I'm not doing well with that. I have a low tolerance of that. So you
Mhm.
have to learn to create ways for ourselves to make ourselves safe.
Yes.
And we have to learn to. I was sharing with someone recently, and she didn't understand. She didn't understand because it was so much for her to figure out what. I said, you have to learn to put yourself in safe spaces, and you have to learn to create even a safe space with just you.
Yes.
Because first you're learning to guard your own heart. You're learning to guard your space, because it's yours. You've given up so much to try to keep the peace and not go against the grain and all of that, that you lost yourself. And you know you want more, but you don't know how to go about it. And the first thing is respect you. This is the only you'll ever have. And you have to create safe spaces, and you have to learn to do that. And in doing that, you create boundaries. Now, is that going to create some friction? Absolutely. But it's a plan, and these are evolving plans, because what system that you put in place this year may not be workable next year, because things change. And so it has to be an intentional thing. And I'm finding that the impact of having, and I just keep jumping back to mental gymnastics, having done so many mental gymnastics as a child and a teenager and a young adult has really created wear and tear on a lot of adults.
Yes.
And so now they're at a place, and I think the pandemic really, when it put people in these spaces where they had to address themselves and explore themselves, it really it brought a lot of that out.
It did.
It was always there, but it forced people to deal with some things, and we're seeing the brunt of it. So these plans, I really like that you have a workbook which helps people work through things. Could you talk a little more about your workbook and your groups before we bring this to a close? This is so much to talk about. I'm passionate about. As you can see, I'm passionate about this. But share with people how working through a workbook is therapeutic, and how being in a support group is, and takes away the shame. Please address the shame, because that's another thing that comes up, the whole shame of it all. But let's share that with you.
I'd like to start out with the shame, because that is such a huge part of this. And a couple of things you said really resonate with all of the work that I do and all of the clients that I see. It is the mental gymnastics. What happens with those mental gymnastics is the person never gets to figure out who they are. They grow up and don't really have a real sense of identity. And this is 100% of my clients feel this way. And 100% of my clients also have some sort of autoimmune or some like IBS, fibromyalgia, something. They all have some sort of physical manifestation of all of the stress that they've experienced. And it's really, it's so sad, because what that tells you is how much of this has been internalized, because there's been no outlet. There's been nobody safe to talk to, like you said before, no place where they're validated, and there's so much shame. The shame is just horrendous, because kids very early, their world is very small. It's usually their parents and their siblings. So something goes wrong, they can't make sense of it any other way. So they automatically assume that it's them. And that just gets built upon over the years. And that's how they are in adulthood. And even the golden children suffer with the same thing. They may get all the praise, but they tend to be high achievers, but achieve at the expense of everything, including their health. So sorry, I'm going to try to cram as much as I can in here.
No, go ahead.
You also mentioned boundaries. So boundaries are the key to managing narcissistic relationships. Many of us have to stay in a narcissistic relationship for one reason or another. You may have to co-parent with a narcissist. You mentioned being a caretaker for elderly parents. There's all kinds of ways that we would have to sort of stay in a relationship to some degree or another. And boundaries are good in any relationship, but in narcissistic relationships, you cannot exist in this relationship for very long without boundaries. And one of the things I hear people say is they'll never respect that boundary. And I always want people to really understand the boundary is not for the narcissist, it's for you. You get choice by having a boundary. And one example I use a lot, because this worked really well with a client of mine, her mother would call her constantly and be asking a lot of questions and wanting, just always in her business and telling her, all of her woes, her medical issues, and trying to gain some sympathy from her daughter. Her daughter's in the medical field too, so that was added onto it. So she would be on the phone, and out of duty would stay on the phone with her mom for as long as it took until mom kind of wore herself out and was done talking. So what she did, a boundary she put in place for herself, was she would initiate the phone call, say, Mom, I have 15 minutes. I wanted to call and check and see how you're doing. And then at 15 minutes or however long, she decided, she would say, okay, well, I've got to go. I've got another obligation. You don't have to even explain yourself. Right. 15 minutes, I got to go. Those are the kind of boundaries we're talking about. And that's an easily enforced boundary for you when you set the expectation at the outset. And this is how boundaries can look. So it sounds really overwhelming, and I think it can feel like, oh my gosh, they're never going to abide by what I say. But you get to remove yourself from the situation. You get to,
and it's respectful. It's also respectful.
Exactly. So exactly. And it's an easy way to just remove yourself from the situation, which is often the best way to handle interactions with a narcissist when they're getting a little out of hand, or always. I mean, the biggest cure for a person who suffered narcissistic abuse is to go no contact with the narcissist. And that doesn't necessarily have to mean forever, but just sometimes to establish the boundaries, you have to go no contact and then let that person back into your life with some boundaries in place. It's different for everybody. Everyone has different circumstances, but the boundaries are key to everything.
That no contact has you got to really be careful with, because it like you said, it's a case-by-case thing.
Yes.
It's a case-by-case thing. You have to know how long to do it. You got to make sure you're doing it. Even the person who initiates the no contact has to be sure that he or she is doing this with not I'm getting back at you type of thing, because that's just adding fire to everything. I mean, just adding fuel to fire, rather. You got to really be careful with the no contact, because I do believe there's a place for it.
Yeah.
And I just believe that it has to be done with, it has to be thoughtful.
It definitely.
You have to be really thoughtful about it and respectful. I think the hardest thing, especially when you're dealing with the parent-child piece, is having respect for one another, because when the narcissist child becomes an adult, some adult children still gravitate or go back to rather that when they're in the presence of that narcissistic parent, they become a kid again, and hate themselves afterwards. And then you have those who are like, I'm grown now, forget that, and totally disrespectful.
No,
So I don't welcome that at all. I think the hardest thing is setting the boundaries in a respectful way, because you got to really be clever.
Oh yeah.
You have to really be clever about that. And I've heard this too. I've heard people say that pedophiles cannot be healed, and I heard that narcissists can't be healed. I don't know if I'm not a clinician, but I've heard that. If that's true, that narcissists can't be healed, what are we doing here?
So what
do you say to that? Is that something that is still being researched or something?
I hope so. I honestly don't know if that's still being researched. I know that is commonly said and commonly believed. I believe it myself, that they can't be healed. Both of those that you mentioned, pedophiles and narcissists. I also believe that folks that are not so far on the narcissistic spectrum can be in healthy relationships, but they really have to do a lot of work. And that is the only way that will ever happen. I know of one couple that's still working on it, but has been able to reunite, but he's also very low on the spectrum. But yeah, they typically don't change. They just don't, unfortunately. I'm trying to think of any situation that I know of, and I can't think of any.
That's why the spouse or the children or the parent or the siblings of that narcissistic person have to develop a plan to survive, to stay in their right mind.
Absolutely.
Because if the narcissist isn't willing to see him or herself as being a part of the problem or the problem and doing the work, it's I can see it not going anywhere.
No.
But for the sanity of the people or the person on the other end, they have to put in the work. That's why I get annoyed with enablers, and excusers, because
I get it.
they are aware, and they are not putting in the work.
Yeah. And
They rather, everybody else is suffering, and it.
Exactly.
And but for the people out there who I don't want to make this just an informative podcast where we're talking about the narcissist, the spectrum, what they do, and the impact on the family. I want to leave hope for the individuals who are impacted.
Yes.
By a narcissistic sibling, spouse, parent. We're not here to change people. We don't have the power to do that.
Mm-hmm.
People have to want to change. And I do believe that sometimes people will engage in manipulative, deceitful ways to get us back into their circle and space.
Mm-hmm.
If they find out what we like or want, then, I'm going to present that and, just to have us around. But that energy doesn't die. It's there. And so what individuals have to do who are in spaces with narcissistic people, I believe, and you can help me out, correct me if I'm wrong, is to find safe places and develop personal plans of action for themselves. Not just to survive, but to thrive. And I do believe that people can have different forms of agitation and weights in their lives and thrive. If we see people doing it every day who have horrible circumstances. But being in a family where there's a narcissist, we're not responsible for the narcissist. We did nothing to contribute to that narcissism. That hopefully will eradicate shame and guilt.
Oh.
We do nothing to create narcissists. They are who they are. And it could be our employer, but right now we're talking about the family. But I want a child, a sibling, a spouse to know that having your sanity doesn't mean enabling.
Yes.
Being a yes person or finding excuses, and when you hear someone complain, shutting them down, that's creating more harm. And I wouldn't want it on my watch, or I wouldn't want to be responsible for a child doing something disastrous to him or herself or anyone, because I was aware of something that psychologically bothered them.
Mm-hmm.
And they became a cutter, they self-harmed or whatever. And I contributed to that by finding excuses for the contributor to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to say there are people out here who do understand. And yes, there are people who don't. And you have to be very careful with sharing and who you choose to share with, because everyone doesn't have the capacity to hear those type of stories. And especially if it is so opposite of what they experience. So be very careful and very thoughtful about who you share with. Now, one of the things I can say about social media is that as crazy as we can find some crazy stories and posts and all out there, but social media has also opened up a vast platform of people like you who are being thoughtful, and helpful with information, not just throwing terms out there, but actually giving a safe space for people to see that there are people. There's a young lady, I saw it. She's a daughter. Her mom has passed, but she's the daughter of a narcissistic mom, and she puts these posts, and she does it in such a funny way, but it's so real about the things that she talks about, like the phone call.
Oh.
when you get on the phone, what's the plan? I mean, and it's every day she has something, and it's like, oh my God, this is so creative. There's another gentleman out there. They're just different people who are really genuine in sharing their information, and yours is as well. When you talk about recovery, what do you mean by that? Because first of all, a lot of people don't see being under the influence of a narcissist as abuse. Why is it abusive? Why would you say it's abusive?
Oh my gosh, there's so many reasons. First of all, it depletes you of all of your energy. I mean, narcissists are often called energy vampires.
Wow.
If you spend any time with a narcissist, and going back to the phone call, a narcissist can be like, they lecture. They don't hear what you have to say. If you contribute to a conversation, they talk over you.
Yes, do all the talking.
Yeah, they really do. And it is, especially now if we're talking about children too, but even with adult to adult relationships. I mean, how invalidating is that when somebody talks over you, doesn't take in your perspective, your point of view, doesn't hear your voice at all. And that can go for, a romantic partner, a friendship, a boss at work, or a coworker. I mean, it can be anywhere. This happens all the time. But the bigger pieces are, I think, when it's the children, like you said, because it really forms who they are. It is definitely generational, going back to something you said earlier, absolutely generational. I did a whole presentation on that. So it's a whole other topic. But I think, if I had to say what the biggest thing is, I would say that it's the child never gets a chance to find out who they are.
Wow.
They go into adulthood kind of living in a daze, and then have to navigate the world on their own. And that is terrible. Mm-hmm. It's just sad. But it's abusive in many ways, because there literally is verbal abuse with every narcissist. There's gaslighting. They make you doubt your own reality. There's just out and out lies. There's so much in romantic relationships. A narcissist typically has a bevy of people to choose from, typically of the opposite sex, that will give them attention if their main supply is not working. So, I get in a fight with my husband, so I move on to, some guys that I'm chatting with. That's typically what a narcissist will do. So there's just so much infidelity. It's a very long list of abuse.
Wow. So recovery, what does that involve? Does it involve, thank you, Carol. Thank you so much. Flying, she calls it flying monkeys. I agree.
Oh yeah, there's terms. The flying monkeys are a whole other topic too.
And she says, I'm not sure if you covered flying monkeys or lack of empathy. Girl, there's so much to this. A part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5.
There really is.
Right, the flying monkeys. I agree with that. Oh, absolutely. Yes. And lack of empathy. Excellent. No, and because I have to bring this to a close, and you please say yes that you'll be on again in the future, because
I'd be happy
part 2. I'm going to call this part 1 because this is so vast. The whole thing of recovery. What does that involve? What does that involve from, I don't want to say the victim, but I guess it is a victim, the client.
I've really struggled with that word too, but I don't have a better word to describe what people have experienced other than being victimized by a really nasty person. But the recovery really, to me, is finding out who they are, learning to let go of the shame, embracing their identity. And that's the fun part. I mean, there's unfortunately a grieving process that goes on too. And that's a really big part of recovery, is that we have to grieve that the parent we had was never, the parent we saw on TV, the ideal parent never existed. No matter how much we want to believe that, we have to accept that just wasn't the case for us. Wow. In a romantic relationship, it's very difficult too, because what we look at is the last 10 years I spent with this person was all a lie. They were never who they showed me that they were. So it's a lot of grief, but the identity building is huge. And that is whether it is an adult narcissistic relationship, a person raised by narcissists, the identity is destroyed, or never developed when a narcissist is in the picture.
Wow. Identity is destroyed. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. That is, oh,
it's sad.
Your identity is destroyed. That's a lot to build up into or to rebuild.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Wow. One viewer says she looks forward to part 2. And I have another viewer says that she recently cut ties with 2 long-standing narcissistic friends over the past 2 years. They drained the life. What did she say here? Let me make sure a minute. I think I lost it. Yeah. They drained the life out of me. It is sad that they have been removed, but I have peace.
Yes.
This conversation gave me some great insight. Thank you. Then there's another one who says, let me post hers. Kay says, yes, after the love is gone, then you have the love bombing. Oh my God.
That's another term. Yep.
Oh my God, we got flying monkeys, love bombing. Oh my gosh.
I have a whole dictionary.
This is such a well-needed topic. And like I said, we hear it, and hopefully it'll open up more with the whole family piece, because we hear it a lot on various platforms. I know I do, on YouTube, Instagram particularly. And that's where I see it the most. A lot of the shows and podcasts deal with it in romantic relationships,
Yes.
the dynamics there, but it extends in, I find that by the time that people have those romantic relationships, they are preteens, young adolescent, adults. All right. So if you have a narcissist as a preteen, they were like that, earlier. So there was something in the family, something happened in the family. That's where it all starts.
Yes.
That's where it all starts. Oh my God, this is awesome. Folks, I put up a scroll here where you can follow Brenda on Instagram. And Brenda, you're on Facebook too, but I don't think you have the same handle there.
No, we're Stephen's Therapy on Facebook, so we talk a lot about narcissistic abuse there too. Gotcha. So,
yeah. So, folks, follow Brenda. I'm telling you, you will be blessed. And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to reach out. There's no shame in this. No. There's no shame. It's all about healing and living to see the better version of yourself. Being overtaken and being groomed by narcissists is not being the best version of you and I. It really isn't. So branch out. Don't be afraid, no matter how old you are. Start looking for ways. There are people out here who truly do understand, and they are willing to thank you. They're willing to work with you. I love the fact that Brenda will work with you one-on-one, and she also has those support groups. That really, when I saw that pop up, I think it was last month, I saw where you were inviting people into your support groups. That's awesome. Awesome. Brenda, thank you so much. I thank you for your busy schedule and that you would take time out to do this. People have been blessed. I'm still getting comments. Yes, people are looking forward to more conversations about this. I believe healthy families build healthy communities, and it makes just better people. So thank you so much for saying yes.
I'm honored. Thank you very much.
And thank you everyone for being a part of tonight's podcast. Please click share. And thank you all who subscribed and joined in tonight. Take care, everyone. See you all next week. Take care. See you, Brenda.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.